Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Tony Allen. I am Chief Executive of the HTEC Certification Scheme. So, welcome along to this first webinar about ISO 27566. If you just bear with us while we just are joining, and then I'll be right with you. So I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes because there were 40 odd people registered. We're up to about half that at the moment. Obviously, some people will register just so they can watch the recording later on, which is absolutely fine. But I'll just give it a minute just to allow people to come in. Whilst I'm doing that, I can tell you that the chat is open and the Q&A is open as well. The polls are open, but I'm probably going to do a poll in this particular one. But the chat and the Q&A are open. So if you feel like you want to ask any questions, please feel free to go to the Q&A to ask a question. I'll do my best to answer as many questions as possible. Apologies for the fact that it might be a slightly dodgy connection. I'm actually in Sydney and in Australia at the moment, working on a project here in Australia to do with 27566. Some of the people on the call will have been involved in that project as well. So I'm just giving it a few moments as we are building up numbers, which are 25. I'll just give it a moment to see if we get any higher. We'll get started. So, right, so let me tell you about 27566. This is a number that if you work in age assurance is going to become quite familiar to you around the world. It's going to become as familiar as any other international or global standard. It's been sort of 5 years in development, and it is now in its final adoption ballot. What that means is that it comes, it's coming to its very last stage of completion, and it's released as what's called an FDIS, a final draft international standard. And that means that we can now actually start talking about it, because at this stage it can't change. There can be no more technical changes, no more sort of reorganization or other information going into it. It is literally now in its adoption phase. I'm going to talk through, we've got these 6 webinars lined up. Do go back onto the website to book yourself on any of the other 5 that are coming up. They're all different, they're not the same. The purpose is to help raise awareness of the new international standard. And in particular with this one, I'm going to talk about the kind of overall structure of it and the broad brush of it and how it relates to other standards, in particular PAS 1296, which some of you are certified against, and IEEE 2089.1 as well, which is aligned to the 27566. And they, in the future, those two are going to work in collaboration to create the approach to certification. So I'll explain a little bit more about that, and then there's more on one of the webinars about certification. I think on the webinars we've got coming up, there are ones about some of the key things to bear in mind. There are ones about some of the configuration settings, and there are some about the. Why have I suddenly got feedback? Why I've got that? Let me just stop a second. There we go. I think I clicked on something that gave me feedback in the ear. Apologies for that. They providing the kind of background to the standard, what the core characteristics are, what the key things to look out for as you approach doing certification might be, and how you might develop relationships and develop information for practice statements and the roles of the different parties that are involved in it. So that's what I plan to cover. As I go through, do feel free to use the chat and Q&A in the session. Now I just need to progress the slide. So hang on. Yeah, so we're going to start with the kind of scope, purpose, and significance of this standard. It was developed by BSI. BSI really go back to PAS 1296, which was a publicly available specification that was written in 2016 to 2018, published in 2018 by a group of age assurance providers. And it was the first time online age assurance had ever really been written down and the key things to consider. And it was always written as a temporary measure that would eventually be replaced by some international standardization. So the BSI promoted and developed this global standard. It also, alongside, we've been working on the IEEE. IEEE is another standards development organization. In many ways similar to ISO, but also in many ways quite different to ISO. The IEEE has always been more about the actual implementation. So the kind of design approach and development approach, particularly how that aligns with child rights and child development and things like the 5 rights principles. ISO is much more of a framework level document. So it describes what age assurance is and what its core characteristics are. But in part 1, it doesn't really describe the implementation of that or how you apply it. There is a part 2 to 27566, which is going to be out in a few years' time, and that's going to look more at the policy trade-offs. And, the decision making around the components or the types of age assurance that you might pick and how you might deploy them. And then there's a part 3, which is about how you measure, analyze, compare age assurance systems, and that's much more aimed at people like ourselves as a certification scheme about how we actually go about analysis of them. The purpose of going for an ISO is to build that global framework, because as businesses develop and they develop their products and services, they very quickly realize that their product is a global product and something that isn't just restricted to either a UK audience or a US or an Australian audience. And in order to make it a global product, you need to have a clear framework globally that's going to understand and use the same terminology and language as you go through the development of your products and you go through the sale of that product. So the purpose of international standards is to build that global trade framework to enable that to happen. And it will be globally significant. I think it's going to become the case that there would be a expectation that you are an ISO certified age assurance provider to have any real prospect of being able to sell your product, particularly to the more discerning and global businesses that are looking to get assurance and due diligence on the products and services that they commission and that they use. We have trouble with the slides going forward. There we go. So how did this start? I mentioned PAS, IEEE, ISO already. Let me just tell you a little bit more about those. So the PAS 1296 2018, written by Dr. Rachel O'Connell, sponsored by a organization in the UK that brought together people that were going to be potentially affected by the Digital Economy Act 2017, and that was legislation brought in the UK that was potentially going to restrict online access to pornography. For all kinds of reasons, that didn't happen, and the government withdrew that legislation literally a week before it was due to come into force, and has now got the Online Safety Act, which is now in force and operational, and has been a requirement to comply with for online access to pornography now for about 5 or 6 weeks in the UK. PAS 1296 was developed as part of that. It wasn't a standard in itself. It was more a kind of description of online services and how they might use age verification. And it contains some links to some trust parameters and some governance parameters, including introducing a concept of a practice statement. And I'll come back a bit more about that practice statement later on this webinar, and maybe a bit more as we go through the future ones. That was then followed by a need to have something which was much more practically aligned, so more of a blueprint for how you would implement age assurance in an online setting, age verification in particular in an online setting. And that came along from the IEEE. So IEEE is the Electro Engineers International Institute, a standards development organization, very well respected, very well known, particularly in Asia and in the US. And they've developed a standard called 2089.1, which is online age verification. Again, very useful document and something which now becomes something that you can start to certify against. And we've been appointed by IEEE as the conformity assessment body for it. Whilst all that's been going on, ISO, the International Standards Organization, has been looking at this from a global framework perspective. And I'm going to talk more about that global framework as we go through this presentation. So why is it important? Well, principally it's important is that as regulators begin to look at their role in determining how age assurance should be mandated or required, and that could be for any reason why you might have an age-related eligibility decision. And some of these terms I'm starting to talk about are terms that are defined within the ISO standards. So what you tend to find with ISO standards, it isn't happening just yet. But what you tend to find is when they come out and they become settled, the terminology starts to be used in them. So the amount of effort that goes into thinking about the terms that are used and the definitions of those terms, so that they can have global recognition. So when I talk about an age-related eligibility decision, what I'm talking about there is that a age-related eligibility policy has been adopted by a policymaker, could be a government, could be a regulator, could be a business themselves, could be a trade association, whoever that policy maker is, but they've said that we are going to have a policy that we are not going to allow the sale of energy drinks or high caffeine drinks to children under the age of 16. That is the age-related policy. That triggers for the seller of those drinks an age-related eligibility decision. So someone presents themselves as the customer, and they have to decide whether or not that customer meets that eligibility requirement. They go through a process to do that. And what that process is age assurance. And age assurance is a whole range of activities that are around how you make that decision. On what basis you make that decision? How is that done through a common framework? How is that done in a trust and transparent way? How can you be held accountable for it? How is it done safely? How is it protecting minors? How is it supporting compliance? How's it working across those different laws and different jurisdictions? Actually, it becomes a bit of an irrelevance as to what the trigger for the age-related eligibility decision is, what the policy is. That becomes an irrelevance. It could be pornography, it could be gambling, it could be alcohol, tobacco, weapons, fireworks, knives, lottery tickets, vapes, comics. That's about the comics. That's a particular UK crazy thing, but whatever the prompt is that creates it doesn't really matter, because the process that you then follow as a relying party, that's the organization that relies on the output of an age assurance system to make that decision. That relying party has to have these common features in place, and they have to be something they can deal with globally. And that helps regulators. It helps regulators to be able to understand their regulations, understand what they're doing, understand how that feeds into achieving the outcomes or the principles that regulator is responsible for enforcing. What are the key differences between the international standard and older standards and codes of practice that there might be around the world? And there are a few of those around. In fact, we found one in the UK which dates back to 2008, which was an Ofcom developed standard. The first thing I would say about the 27566 is it focuses on age assurance, not identity assurance. You do not have to prove who you are to prove how old you are. That is a really fundamental this stands aside from age assurance. A lot of the things in the standard that deal with privacy, digital footprints, security, acceptability are actually things that are not the way that identity proofing is done. They are done in a different way. So that's something to just understand straight away. The second thing is it focuses now on these three methods. So whatever approach to age assurance you have, it will be one of these three methods if it's being done in alignment with the international standard. So the method number one, age verification. Age verification is the finding a date of birth about an individual, binding that date of birth to that individual, and calculating how old they are from that date of birth. So it is a calculation method. Age verification will always involve the age assurance provider accessing the date of birth, wherever that data is, whether it's on a passport, a driving license, a school record, health record, bank record, wherever that data is, it involves the age assurance provider accessing that date of birth data. Age estimation is the analysis of features of humans that vary with age. And there are lots of things that change with us. We get older, we look older, our voice changes, our heart rate changes, our geometry of our hands change, our ability to do things changes as well. Those are all features of humans that vary with age. Doesn't involve any documents or records or any thing that involves sort of identifying an individual. And then the third one is inference. Now, inference is interesting in that it's a relatively new term in the context of age assurance, but actually is what has happened with age assurance over the years. Inference is about finding out any other fact or facts about an individual, binding those fact or facts to that individual, and then from that drawing a reasonable inference about how old they might be. So it can be absolutely anything from which you can draw that inference. So they're in year 9 or grade 9 at school. They are a licensed commercial airline pilot. They are a senior citizen bus pass holder. They're all facts about individuals. And if you can identify that fact and you can bind that fact to an individual, you can make an inference about how old they are. And that's the third type. And then there's also another piece in this, which is where you combine those together in a sequential way to do successive validation. So you might try one and then try another and then try another until you get to the point where you've got confidence in the result. The scope for the 27566 is global and it's cross-sector. As I say, it's not relevant why the age related eligibility decision is required. The big thing that is in here is a structured approach to transparency. So each age assurance provider, each intermediary, and each relying party using age assurance would be expected, if they're ISO compliant, to have a transparency statement, a practice statement about what they're doing and how they're doing that. So that it's clear how people's data are being used, how accessible they are, what the different types of technologies that they've deployed are, and how that is being done, and that helps with accountability. And the other thing I would say is that there is nothing in 27566 that says you must do it this way or do it that way. You must use age verification here, or you must use age estimation here, or you must use this particular technology. There's nothing in 27566 that says that at all. It is very much down to these are the characteristics that will be expected, and that makes it adaptable around the world and to different laws. So I've covered this already, which is covers these three core things: verification, estimation, inference, and then if you combine them together, successive validation. They are quite different buckets, and they are also quite different in the sense that they would differ in the way that they would be measured and analyzed and compared. So it's not necessarily the case that you would measure age estimation in the same way that you would measure age verification. So although the standard talks about classification accuracy, the likelihood that the system gets the answer right, the input parameters to that will differ. And so you can have different classification accuracies depending on the configuration settings of the context of use and how they might be combined together through successive validation. All of those contexts would need to be taken into account when thinking about the accuracy of the system. Just checking that we are all still good. So yeah, just checking that. Who needs it? What's it all about? So principally, you have to say that the service providers, age assurance service providers, are going to be the most likely audience for it. And as I say, as with most ISO standards, as they embed and develop, it becomes, although it might become a statutory requirement, it becomes a practical requirement to trade in the global marketplace. If you look at things like 27001, which is information security management, or environmental management, or whatever the standard is, they become an expectation, and I think it is likely to be the case that as relying parties, implement age assurance, one of their early questions is this an ISO certified age assurance system? And if the answer to that is yes, then they'll take a lot of confidence from that and comfort from that. If the answer to that is no, it doesn't necessarily stop them from continuing to use your system, but it's going to make it significantly harder to compete. And that's what you tend to find with the way that ISO standards embed themselves in global trade. The second one that I'm going to highlight here is not intermediaries. I'll come back to intermediaries, but the relying parties. The ISO standard does enable relying parties to gain certification themselves. It's probably only relevant for them if they are either doing an in-house built age assurance system, something which is built within their own platform or their own technology, as opposed to using a third-party provider, or they've got their own control over the configuration settings of an age assurance provider. So they're making the decisions about what actual activity should be happening in that age assurance process. Then certification of relying parties kicks in. Otherwise, as a relying party, you're unlikely to need certification yourself. Intermediaries are organizations that sit between any of those parties or linked to those parties. So they could be between the provider and the individual, the person who is being age assured. They could be between the provider and the relying party. They could be between the provider and a data broker or a data center or a source of a component. Again, the standard does provide for intermediaries and does look at what their role is, and they are open to certification for their intermediary solutions. Of course, you could be all three. So you could be a provider, an age assurance provider, and a relying party, and an intermediary. Although you can't really be an intermediary and a relying party in the same transaction, but in different transactions, you could be overall. So the key market driver for this is the demand from the big relying parties, the big global platforms, to say the age assurance sector really needs to get its act together. There's so many different ways of doing it, so many different options that are available. For those of you that have seen the Australian Age Assurance Technology Trial, there were 48 providers offering 60 different solutions. It's quite a complex marketplace out there. What they want to see is some standardization of that so that it becomes easier for them to be able to specify and to state what they want, easier for them to implement, and easier for them to trade and have that global competition. Because one of the things we're seeing increasingly from relying parties over the last few years is a need to have vendor resilience, so that they're not necessarily reliant on one vendor doing it in one way. They want to look at how they can implement multiple channels to protect the resilience of their business. The other thing that ISO standards do is it helps them to compare providers and ensures that there is that compliance and reducing risk. So let's talk a bit about it coming in. So it will be published this year. That was confirmed in a meeting I was at last week in Kunming in China. It is currently in its adoption ballot. That's going to complete by the end of October, and then it will be out. You can get it now. It is available online. It costs about £20 at the moment, but you can get it as an FDIS. Sometimes it's a good time to buy because the prices do go up when it becomes published. But having said that, there is also an application that's currently being processed by ISO to make it freely available. So it won't be the part one won't be a standard that you would need to pay for. You might still need to pay for part 2 or 3 if you're interested in those. and that's part about the global adoption and the global need. It's also part about the relationship with regulators and with governments around the world. So we are seeing that early adoption. We are seeing regulators referring to it. It is widely anticipated that we will start to see the global online safety regulators, data regulators, gambling regulators, and the more localized regulators of things like weapons and fireworks and firearms and knives and alcohol start to refer to it. That did happen quite a bit with PAS 1296 within the context of the UK. And we expect to see something similar as it goes around the world. In the medium term, we will start to see that wider industry uptake and awareness. We'll start to see it appearing as a pre-qualification question in procurement. When you get that if, all of you that are into bidding for tenders and clients, when you get that dreaded questionnaire of compliance, it's going to be one of the questions that is going to be on that questionnaire. And in the long term, we'll get this global standardization, and we'll start to see interoperability emerge. I'm going to say thank you for listening to this first of the 6 webinars. I've got a period of time now for questions. Before I move to those questions, let me just come back to this screen. Before I move to those questions, I'm just going to say that the certification process is open. We're able to open it as soon as the ISO entered into its FDIS ballot, and that's because we know that it's not going to change. And that means that our primary attention is to go to the existing certification clients that are certified against PAS 1296 and look at upgrading them effectively. And I'm sure that my team has already been in touch with those already. If you are new to it and you would like to consider, starting certification, we can talk to you about that. And you can do. I think it's also important to say that what we are doing, the 275. Neither is the IEEE by itself, but what we are doing, working together across ISO, across IEEE, across the accreditation bodies, is bringing that together into a holistic certification scheme. We've already been accredited to do that by IEEE, and we will have to upgrade our existing UCAS accreditation to do that for the 27566, which is part of a planned transition process. It's there. It's good to go. It's ready to go. Get in touch. Hopefully, you'll be able to come on one of the other sessions. But for now, I shall see if we have any Q&A or any chat. I have to just navigate the different screens for that. But do feel free to throw any questions in. I will give it a moment. I do appreciate this is the first of 6 brief webinars, so I expect the questions might get more as we get into the other 5. What I can do is, let me just, while we're just doing that, let me just tell you about the other 5 and when they are. We do feel free to put anything into the Q&A. My computer is loading. There we go. So the second webinar is about preparation for certification and scoping your system. That is going to be on September the 18th, which is, what's that, Thursday, time. The third webinar is about the 5 call at 11 a.m. These are UK times. The fourth webinar is about components and contexts of use, which are part of the building blocks of age assurance. And in particular, that will look at the issue of configuration management. One thing I will say to anybody that is considering this is that the issue of configuration management in the ISO is much more pronounced than it was anything previously. The ability for either your clients or yourself to control the way that the system operates and the previous in different standards have required. We then have webinar number 5. Sorry, 4 is on October PM. Webinar number 5 is levels of confidence and indicators of effectiveness. That's going to happen on October the 6th. And webinar number 6 is the certification process. So that's a step-by-step guide as to what you need to prepare for and what will take you through the certification journey. And that's happening on October the 10th. We've got roughly 30 people signed up for each of those. They're free to attend. Go online, click on the link to sign up, and we may well rerun them again if need be. But I wasn't expecting a Q&A in the first one, and that seems to have been the case. So with that, I think I will hand you back 10 minutes of your day and wish you all a very good day. Thank you, everybody.